Welcome to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas. Open Minds Radio is your UFO news authority, presenting evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
That is right. I am the host, Alejandro Rojas. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us at Open Minds Radio. I want to talk about something exciting. Last night, coast to coast, Antonio and I stayed up into the wee hours of the morning in order to bring to the tens of thousands of millions of coast to coast listeners. Well, they might not have quite that many, but they have a whole lot of them, I'll tell you what, to talk about UFOs with our good buddy, guest host, George Knapp. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully you were able to tune in. If not, check out the archives. Just go to Coast to Coast. They used to call it Streamlink, but now it's called the Coast to Coast Insider. And it's actually not a bad deal, like $5 a month or something like that. And you can have access to all of the archives. So get in there and download all of the Alejandro and Antonio Coast to Coast appearances, because that's like my 6th time on Coast to Coast, I think. So I'm very proud to have obtained that, because I remember thinking, wow, that'd be kind of crazy if I was on Coast to Coast one day, and here I am, number 6. Number 7 will probably be right around the corner. So that was a lot of fun, and if you are joining from that, if you're a new listener because of Coast to Coast, thanks for coming, and thanks for hopefully enjoying then our Coast to Coast appearance, and I hope you enjoy the show, because this is going to be a great one. In fact, honestly, this is kind of an interview I did a while ago that we're going to be playing later. However, John Schuessler, who is the interviewee, he was a founding member of MUFON. He was the second international director of MUFON. He was for quite some time, even when I started, he was the international director. He worked in the space industry for his entire career as an engineer and at NASA. And in fact, he was a director. So he was in charge of some very important projects, including some related to the Gemini missions, which was prior to the Apollo missions. It was our first manned ventures into space, our first spacewalk, stuff like that was Gemini. And back then, astronauts started seeing UFOs, and he was concerned about that, and that really got him into the whole UFO subject, and he's going to tell us all about that. Now, I'm friends with John because luckily he lived in Colorado, and so did I, and that's how I got associated with the board members of MUFON, is because I lived in Colorado, and that's where the headquarters were. So he was a mentor of sorts for me. And unfortunately, I've been trying to get him on the show for quite some time now, but his health has not been that great, and so he doesn't feel that he could, kind of stay up and talk for an hour. So he hasn't been giving many interviews or doing many lectures lately, and his lectures are wonderful. They're incredible. Really, he can stand up there for an hour or two just showing government document after government document. And I'm not talking about controversial MJ-12 documents where, nobody's quite sure if they're real or not. These are Freedom of Information Act, real documents that you can show are actual military documents regarding UFO cases and UFO investigations and all of the people involved with UFOs. So it's very cool to have those, to have seen those lectures back then. And also, his involvement with NASA and talking about how NASA works, how the secrecy has happened, and how they were told to deal with UFOs, and his insider information on how they did deal with UFOs. So it's invaluable information, and I wanted to make sure, because I haven't had this interview, on the podcast before, get this out to you guys, because I know you will love it. Some of you might have heard it because I had it posted on UFO Think Tank, but really it hasn't gotten too many listens there, so only you hardcores have heard it, and there's probably quite a few of you hardcores here listening today. And thanks for returning, hardcores. Hardcores rock, and so do newbies. So, and this is going to be a great interview for either. I also wanted to mention that you have to go to a URL called contactinthedesert.com. And when you get there, you need to register for the weekend, June 3rd to the 5th, 2011, because this is going to be a cool event at Joshua Tree put on by our good buddy Steve Murillo. And he's essentially having a little conference out in Joshua Tree, the beautiful area in California. It's a park with pretty rocks and trees. And if you've seen the Joshua Tree, they're very unique. And you two did a rock video out there and everything, and that was really cool. But this is going to be a real fun conference. He's going to focus it kind of around experiencers and abduction. He's going to have Dr. Roger Lear, Dr. David Jacobs, Yvonne Smith. He's going to have Stan Romanek, and me. And even though he doesn't have me up on the website yet, and I'm going to give him an earful for that. What's up, Murillo? But I am going to be speaking there, assuming the event happens. And I hope it does, because it's going to be a lot of fun, but he needs a few more registrations. So if you can go check it out and register, you'll be guaranteed a good time. Open Minds is going to be there. Jason will be there. Well, maybe, hopefully. And I know Maureen's planning on being there. Maureen, or UFO Chick, for those of you in the chat. Blew her cover, but her cover was blown a long time ago. So come check us out at Contact in the Desert. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're really looking forward to that. Also, just right after that in July also is the MUFON conference, so the MUFON Symposium, and they're going to have an astronaut, Story Musgrave, so that's going to be a lot of fun too. So we have a summer full of ufological fun and craziness, and by craziness I mean Maureen, I'm sure, is going to get crazy and run wild in the desert because she's a crazy woman. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Moving on to the news. You might have noticed if you went to our website, there's this UFO news type of stuff, and we call ourselves like the UFO News Authority, and you're like, what is that? And well, what that is we put up all of the news going on in the UFOs, because believe it or not, there's a lot going on in this field. Just like we talked about in Coast to Coast, we filled 3 hours worth of UFO news and information. And so you can go to our website to see headlines on a daily basis of news stories that are happening out there. And then what we do on the radio show is we bring this guy, Jason McClellan. This guy's a flippin' genius. He's got all this information and he's got all this news. And then he comes here and tells us all about it. So I'm really happy to welcome Jason McClellan to the show to share all the news. Jason, why are you giving me a funny look? Talk some news, baby.
UFOs in the news? That's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild stuff.
Greetings, Alejandro, and hello, everyone. This is your Open Minds news brief for Monday, March 28th, 2011. A triangular formation of lights was seen hovering above Lafayette, Colorado last Monday, and the event was captured on video by Leroy Vandervet and his son, Nick. The 3 solid red lights hovered silently in the sky, according to Vandervet. There were several witnesses to the UFO. ABC News reportedly called the Federal Aviation Administration, but they declined to comment on the UFO. And Good Morning America even visited Lafayette to investigate the sighting. And perhaps the most in-depth coverage of this sighting has been done by UK newspaper The Daily Mail, illustrating the international coverage of the event.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened more than a week ago now, and still today, it's making international headlines.
Yeah, it's kind of been slow to get out there, but it's gotten out there for some reason or other. I know it got popular this weekend because it was like the Today Show or something like that aired some of the video. But
and it's funny how this happens with sightings. You know, there are so many sightings that happen all over the world every single day. But there seems to be something that causes the media as a whole to latch on to one particular story and kind of run with it, and then everybody picks it up, and you see the video everywhere. It's big news for several days and then it's gone.
At least this is a decent video. I mean, it's nothing that extraordinary, you know, but it is a typical type of sighting. It's at very strange lights that are, you can't really say what, at least for me, I can't say for sure what they are. I really haven't seen, even in the news stories, much debunking going on, or people saying that, you know, they know what that is.
Right.
So the news stories have played it pretty straight, and it is actually in the area of the MUFON headquarters.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of big media outlets have shown this video on TV, Good Morning America, and yeah. So, and there was, it's not too similar, but sort of similar video in the UK. A British man managed to videotape a UFO a couple weeks ago while he was watching the supermoon on the night of the supermoon. He described the UFO as 3 huge red lights moving in formation across the sky in total silence. However, Essex police say they didn't receive any UFO reports that weekend. But again, there's video of 3 lights in the sky moving, and like the Colorado video, and according to the witness, he didn't feel that it was a single craft. He thought the lights were independent. They were moving together, but also independently.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in the second video. You definitely see the lights moving in a formation, and they change, formation. So it's not a single craft.
It's interesting, too, that the videos were so similar, because I saw that supermoon one first, actually. And I thought, well, it's kind of a cool video. It's a typical sighting. It's one that most likely isn't a hoax. I mean, because hoaxes are CG'd, and if you're going to take the time to CG something, you're going to do something more extraordinary than these tiny little lights that are, kind of just floating in the air. So it seemed legitimate, plus the witness and the news that it came out on. So it seemed pretty good. And then you see the Colorado one, which is similar, just a little bit better of a video. And the similarities I thought were pretty incredible.
I thought so too. And, they're 2 sightings that are still making headlines today.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that 2 very similar sightings
Yeah.
are in the news at the same time.
And I like the supermoon.
The supermoon. Unfortunately, it was cloudy for us, so I really didn't see much of it. But
yeah. Prior to them naming this event the supermoon, my buddy in high school had that
was that
title.
his nickname?
He had the title of having the supermoon.
I can imagine why.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for sharing, Alejandro.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done a poll in a while. Let's talk about a poll, Alejandro. Several residents of Maryborough, Queensland, on Australia's east coast, reported seeing strange lights in the sky earlier this month. According to local newspaper, the Fraser Coast Chronicle, their office has been flooded with calls and messages from people who witnessed the lights, people concerned about the lights, and people who claim to have interacted with extraterrestrials. The overwhelming response from readers in response to the initial reports about the mysterious lights prompted the paper to place a poll on its website, which posed the question, are aliens visiting Earth? An incredible 60% of the poll's nearly 2,000 participants think that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth. Perhaps more surprising is that 20% of those who responded to the poll claim to have met an extraterrestrial.
Wow.
While the Chronicle's poll is non-scientific, the results are still surprising.
All of these non-scientific polls that people put up, and I'm talking about from credible news sources, a lot of times they'll kind of pop a poll up on their story. Do you believe in UFOs? Do you not? Do you believe in ETs? And always, even if they're AOL or if they're Time or Fox or whoever it is, even though it's a news source that isn't catering to the UFO crowd, the numbers are always really high. It could be because people who believe are more likely to look at a story about UFOs, but still the numbers are always really high.
Well, this one, is different from most of the polls we see. Most of the ones that we hear about are in response to UFOs or extraterrestrial life in general.
Mm-hmm.
But this one actually mentions extraterrestrials coming to Earth.
Yeah.
And again, the other polls that we've seen, I think the response, the percentage we usually see is about 50% now Are we up to 50%?
Well, the latest polls have actually been in the 30. I mean, the ones that are scientific are in the 30s to 30 to 50.
Right. So this one's showing 60%.
Yeah.
Thinking that we've been visited by extraterrestrials is incredible.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, the movies, too. You know, George Knapp asked us last night, why so many movies? And it's because people are interested in this subject, you know. Even though it doesn't feel like it when you go out into the public and people seem skeptical, and when you tell them, you know, you work for a UFO magazine, they kind of think that's weird or whatever. Still, the polls, even the scientific polls, always say 30 to 50%. That's a lot of people.
Right. And, you know, you can talk to conspiracy theorists who have their ideas about Hollywood and, you know, wonder about the secret agendas behind all these extraterrestrial-themed movies. But you can also look at it from what Hollywood is, and it's a big money machine. They're going to do what makes money, and they know right now extraterrestrial movies can make money because the interest is there.
Yep.
Venezuela's socialist president Hugo Chavez thinks he knows why we haven't found life on Mars. During a speech last Tuesday, Chavez stated, "I have always heard that it would not be strange that there had been civilization on Mars, but maybe capitalism arrived there, imperialism arrived and finished off the planet." His comments aren't too shocking, however, as Chavez has repeatedly blamed many of Earth's problems on capitalism. The statement was made during a speech Chavez delivered on Tuesday at a World Water Day event in Venezuela. According to Fox News, this isn't the first time Chavez has referred to life on Mars. And as we discussed even last week, the Red Planet has been in the news a lot lately for various efforts underway that will make future missions possible to Mars.
Yeah.
Like that cool spacesuit we talked about last week.
Yeah, the cool space. I think he was kidding, though. I mean, I think it was kind of a metaphor for him. That capitalism, no matter where it goes, will destroy everything is his kind of idea.
That guy's insane, so who knows? But he's definitely talked about extraterrestrials before and UFOs, and actually looked into some UFO sightings that he's heard about.
Yep. Well, and, you know, speaking of Mars, there was even a story, and I didn't get to read much of it, but I just saw it, about a water-powered spacecraft that could hopefully get us to Mars earlier. Lots of ideas floating out there on how to get us to Mars. And in fact, there was also another story about this group who wants to send a little device because they might be able to prove, or their goal is to prove, that life on Mars is related to life here.
It's a good thing that's not one of my news stories, because I would have had to smack you. Jumping the gun like that. What if that would have been one of my stories? Wah, wah. Nope,
It wasn't though, right?
No, you're safe. But no, that's a very good point. And that was a really cool story. I read that today. And even aside from Mars and possibly as a springboard to Mars, you know, NASA's looking at missions to asteroids and other things where they can go and then go to Mars from there.
Yeah.
Weird stuff going on.
Why go to an asteroid? Go to the moon, people. We already told them
I know, playing these games and there's so much involved in going to an asteroid, like picking out the right asteroid and getting the landing and everything.
Come on.
They're even thinking the landing is going to be impossible, so they're going to just get close to the asteroid, have the guys get out of the ship and go around the asteroid. They're just wasting time. Go to the moon.
Yeah. What was the movie where they landed on the asteroid and it was a total, like, disaster? It was very difficult. Bruce Willis.
Armageddon.
Was in it, right? Armageddon. That didn't look fun at all.
No.
People are flying off into space.
Didn't work out so well for him.
No.
Well, NASA's been busy, and data collected by NASA's Kepler telescope continues to reveal new and exciting information about the Milky Way galaxy. Hey, that's our galaxy.
Oh, I've been there. It's awesome.
Of the 1,200 possible planets identified by Kepler in February, 68 were said to be Earth-sized. But the Huffington Post recently reported a new study by NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory that suggests 1 out of every 37 to 1 out of every 70 sun-like stars may have an Earth-like planet in its orbit. Explaining the study, Joseph Catanzarite. I think that's made up. That sounds like some sort of asteroid or something. That's probably the asteroid
like
they're going to land on.
Rocks you find on an asteroid.
That's right. He's an astronomer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and he told Space.com, "This means there are a lot of Earth analogs out there, 2 billion in the Milky Way galaxy. The more scientists learn about our galaxy, the more apparent it becomes that there is still so much to learn about our galaxy, let alone faraway galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
Incredible. 2 billion Earth-like planets.
Yeah. And that's short, because it's actually 2 billion trillion, according to my calculations.
Billion, trillion, cajillion is what you told me yesterday.
Oh, yeah. And about 10% of those have advanced civilizations on them.
Your calculations are probably a little low, but I agree.
They're spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we keep talking about this. They discover and discover and discover.
And I don't know why they haven't found this stuff before, but we've talked about this too, how there's been this illusion that NASA understands what's going on in our backyard, but really they don't.
Right.
Everything is new every day, it seems.
Yeah.
Exciting times, and we're learning about all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that just means, even though we talk about this stuff, we don't talk as though it's authoritative and we have all the answers, whereas the astronomers often do that.
Correct.
Talking about the SETI astronomers and stuff, especially the ones that poo-poo the extraterrestrial visitation hypothesis, and they don't know.
Shame on the poo-pooers.
Shame on the poo-pooers.
Well, here's another study. Some scientists believe that life existed elsewhere in the universe, but it was wiped out by exploding stars. The Daily Mail recently reported that some astronomers believe white dwarf hypernovas have occurred several times over millions of years. These hypernovas create black holes, and in these black holes is where astronomers believe alien life was sucked. These same astronomers believe that life on Earth might meet a similar fate, but not for a few hundred years, so we're okay for a while.
It's so funny because talk about speculation. That's just like, someone calling, some of these real kind of wild speculation that we get in this field that happens about, what aliens are doing and all of this thing when nobody knows for sure, well, except for maybe some that are talking to them, which is possible. But still, talk about wild speculation with all the room out there, with all the stars we just talked about, and the so few examples of black holes that we know about, to just kind of say, intelligent civilizations were probably sucked up by black holes.
Look, it's a safe paper to write about, I guess. When you can do something like that can't really be disproved until you're long gone.
Oh, right.
We're all going to be sucked into a black hole, but not for a couple hundred years. You're going to be
funny,
gone.
all these theories. They're the ones that are going to come here are going to be robots, they were saying last week. All the civilizations are sucked up by black holes, so I guess they can't send us robots.
They're all authorities. They know.
Yeah.
They're telling us the way it is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
That's pretty wild speculation there. I mean, if they said it was possible, and I'm sure it is possible, and maybe probable that civilizations out there may have been sucked up by black holes.
Sure.
We may be sucked up by a black hole one day.
And we may
That's
not.
too bad.
We may get slammed with an asteroid.
Yeah.
We may all live on the moon.
Yep.
I'm going to write some papers. Pretend I know what I'm talking about, too.
You should.
And perhaps this could be ridiculous, too, but we'll wait and see. Steven Spielberg is producing a sci-fi drama series about aliens that will be premiering on TNT in June. The name of the series is Falling Skies, and unlike films like Battle Los Angeles that only look at the initial attack on Earth by extraterrestrial forces, Falling Skies looks at a devastated Earth that has been fighting alien forces for half a year.
Disappointed.
Oh, yeah.
Already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as if, Battle LA, they lost the battle in LA, and now they've got colonization that they're fighting against. Still, I mean, it's not an original story. Not like Taken, which was very original. That was pretty cool. Or even Super 8, even though it's kind of looks like a very, it really reminds me, the trailer of Stephen King movie with, some unknown monster in a small town,
right,
killing animals and killing people. But at least that's a little more original.
Right now, it seems anything that, again, they figured out that they can make money with extraterrestrial movies, but it seems they're stuck in the mindset of, All right, let's have aliens come and attack the Earth. We'll fight off the aliens. Aliens don't have to be bad.
Yeah, Cocoon, they were nice. And that
E.T. was
cool.
nice.
Yeah, E.T.
I like E.T.
Maybe they think that's just boring. But not.
I haven't seen it, but was Paul nice?
Paul was freaking hilarious. You got to go see it. You and Maureen have not gone and see it, and that's stressing me out, man.
All right.
Because then we can't talk about the jokes, and it was hilarious. I just talked to, who did I talk to? I've talked to several friends who have seen it, and they all agree that it's really funny. You guys are going to love it. And I think all of you, as my good buddy Jesse Randolph would call people, saucer heads, UFO people, are all going to love this movie. So
well, I'm
everybody
excited to
listening,
see it,
go
and
check it out.
I'm even more
Funny.
excited to see it because it's not a movie about evil extraterrestrials.
Yeah, this guy, well, he's not the best example of an extraterrestrial, but he's funny. He's like a regular dude, and he's vulgar if you don't like bad words, or don't take your kid, because there's lots of bad words. But other than that,
My mom says I can't hear bad words, so I'm out.
oh, dang it.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, well, you'll watch it on TV. I don't know how they're going to censor out all of that, because it was kind of, the bad words were kind of a theme in this thing, actually. And then they play into the story, and I don't want to mess it up for you.
Well, they've managed to do a fine job on TV with Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And swearing is a large part of that show. So.
Although, who's his buddy who
Jeff.
lived in the house?
Oh, Leroy?
Leroy. None of his lines on TV are funny
No.
because they have to edit what he says so much. He doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Valid point.
Yeah.
Alejandro, that is it for the news for today. Be sure to check out all these stories and more at openminds.tv, your source for UFO-related news. I'm Jason McClellan, your Open Minds correspondent, and you've been briefed. Back to you, Alejandro.
Thank you, Jason. Just to fill you in on some of the other stories that we have up on the website, UFO case files revealed, of course, is an ongoing thing that we've been doing. Michael Stratt, who is an aerospace kind of draftsman, he takes UFO sightings out there from reports, and then he kind of makes a 3D rendering of what the people reported and put them up against a background that is similar to what the witness saw, so you kind of get a neat idea of what the witnesses had seen. So we have another one up on that. And what's cool about this is a lot of people, in fact, Seth Shostak asked me this question. If so many people are seeing UFOs, why don't astronomers see UFOs? Well, they do, and they always have. In fact, one of the sightings in this latest one was by a gentleman named Professor Clyde Tombaugh, and this was in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And this was a fairly famous astronomer who had his own sightings, so you can see what he saw on that story. Pretty exciting. Another really cool story, and this is something that we talked about last night, and we've talked about this with Antonio before. Antonio, of course, was at the UN really covering a story in the late 70s when Sir Eric Gary of Grenada was trying to push forward a UFO initiative in the UN. And some new British documents and the new batches of files that they've released kind of show a story, interestingly, of how the British government was trying to derail this whole process. They were working very hard. In fact, one of the quotes is pretty cool. They essentially said, and we have it at the top of the story here, that in one of the quotes, the British government saying that they're firmly opposed to a Grenada resolution on UFOs. And they go on to say, therefore, make no attempt to conceal the UK's intention, meaning the UK's intention to totally destroy this resolution on UFOs. Now, the United States government wasn't so against it. I think they knew even back then that it really didn't have any teeth. So in other words, you can ask that you get UFO files, but that doesn't mean you're going to get all the best UFO files. So it's a very interesting story that Antonio just wrote and we just put up recently. that we talked about a bit on Coast to Coast last night, and you can get the full story on the website, including some very exclusive photos of Sir Eric Gary at the UN doing his talk, and also some stamps that Granada made in regards to this whole UFO initiative. So some really cool pictures there. So go to openminds.tv and check it out. It's right on the front page. It's in the featured articles. But now, let's go ahead and start our interview with John Schuessler. I'm really excited about this because we talked about a lot of great things, and it's rare that you get an insight into NASA and hear about these true UFO stories that the NASA administration has had to deal with in the past. So, if we can roll the interview.
Well, I got into UFOs many years ago, back in the mid-'60s. And the reason I did that was I was working in the space program. I was on the Gemini program. I was responsible for the life support system on Gemini. And during the missions, I listened to the downlink and monitored how the systems were performing. And on Gemini 4, which was a manned mission with James McDivitt and Ed White, McDivitt said while he was on orbit, there's something up here. I see something outside. And ground control ignored him completely. They didn't say what or why, are you crazy, are you kidding? They didn't say anything. They just went right on with what they were doing. And he said something else about it, and he said, I'm taking a picture of it. And after several minutes, the ground controller came back and said, are you still seeing something, or something like that? And I thought, this is really something. They would think it was a possible danger. If there was something on orbit, was it debris? Was it something else? And they never cared. Just didn't care. So that led me to believe that they must know it's there. And it led him to believe that he should be a little bit angry. And after he landed, and several weeks later, he went to the film lab to look at the film, and they showed him something that wasn't what he said he photographed. And so he spoke out publicly on it. Well, as a young engineer, that was fascinating, because we were working 7 days a week to get spacecraft up there, and many long days. And if something else is there, we ought to know about it. And that started my chase for the technology involved in UFOs. And that was the mid-'60s. And soon after that, I announced, through my family first, that I was interested in UFOs. And it turned out that my father, a railroad engineer, had a fireman on his engine that knew Walt Andrus in Quincy, Illinois. And he said, well, I have a friend, Walt, that's interested in UFOs too. We ought to get them together. And so they did. And we struck off a friendship right away. And Walt said, you want to join APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization? And I said, well, if it'll help and help me get information, I'll do it. So I joined them, and I became a consultant for them for a short period of time. And that was at a time when APRO was wanting to pull back and have more home control and less control in the field. And they kind of felt that Walt was an upstart. He was taking too much command out there in the field, so they told him he couldn't do it anymore. And he said, fine. And so he said, we'll start our own organization. So he and I and several others, Dr. Alan Nutke from the University of Wisconsin, had a meeting in 1969 and formed MUFON. And that was the Midwest UFO Network. And that was the start of what we still have today, this many years later. We think it was a good move. Pulling back and you might say censoring the work that's done is not the way to get answers in this field. The way to get answers is greater cooperation, greater exposure, looking at the varying things involved. So my start was very early on. It wasn't because there were UFOs. It was because of something that happened in the space program. But then, and very quickly after I mentioned that to Walt and got involved with APRO, I started getting chances for interviews and stuff. And one thing that came into Walt was an airline pilot, Ozark airline pilot flying a DC-3. His name was Captain Don Lochner, and he had taken off from Columbia, Missouri. And right after takeoff, the FAA tower called him and said, there is something in the sky over Kirksville, Missouri. We wondered if you would take a look. And it turned out that the weather station in Kirksville, Missouri, which is north of Columbia, had reported something hovering above the weather station at fairly high altitude, almost 10,000 feet, something like that. I don't remember the details right now. But so he turned toward it, and he immediately could see it even from Columbia. And he talked through the tower and they guided him, and they even told him when it started to move. And it didn't start to move, however, until he picked up his handheld Alice light, which is a very bright light that I have in the cockpit. And he flashed it at it. When he did, it changed colors and started moving west. And in a few seconds, it was out of sight. And when he got into Kansas City, he checked in his aircraft, completed the mission, went up to the tower and said he wanted to talk to a radar operator about what was seen over Kirksville. And they said, "We don't have any idea what you're talking about. Are you crazy? We haven't talked to anybody tonight about that." So that made him mad. You know, he said, "I possibly put people in jeopardy on an airplane at answering a request, and you dropped me on my head." Well, it turned out there were 7 professors from the University of Missouri on that plane, and most of them saw it. He called what they call stewardess then, flight attendant today, to the cockpit, and she watched it along with him and the co-pilot. So we had really high credibility witnesses that had nothing to gain from this whatsoever. And that pretty well cinched it for me. There's something flying that we got to know about. So that's my early days. That's where it all began.
What was your role in the space program?
Well, I started out as just a young engineer doing grunt work for the first few months, but that was the end of the Mercury program at McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis. And soon after, I transferred into the Gemini program and got involved in the life support system and all the life support equipment, the design, the engineering, the test, the pre-flighting, and then monitoring during flight. And it was a lot of responsibility, but the space program did that for people. Anybody that had the desire and the capability, age didn't matter. They just gave us the responsibility, which was marvelous. And so I went through the whole Gemini program, and after Gemini, I shifted into the Skylab first space station design and was responsible for the life support system equipment on that, including the EVA equipment, the oxygen storage tanks, all that kind of stuff, which was really a fun engineering job. It was very hard, but it was really fun. We built the first regenerative CO2 removal system for that vehicle, where instead of carrying up chemicals, you just have a machine that opened and closed and dumped CO2 to space after it took it out in synthetic zeolites. So, you know, it was fun work. I didn't have much time for UFOs during Skylab. But when Skylab flew, then Pete Conrad said, "Hey, there's a little red thing up there in orbit with us." So it got my attention again, you know, that sort of thing. And after Skylab, I transferred to Houston, Texas, the Johnson Space Center, and worked for a year as a technical manager, technical director in the crew system division, supporting the design of the new spacesuit for the shuttle and that sort of thing. Then in the second year on, I moved over into flight operations and got clear out of design and got into the operation end of it. Found that fascinating, working with training the astronauts and writing all their procedures and fixing up their flight data files, and, you know, a little bit of everything. And in about 1983, McDonnell Douglas named me as Director of Engineering for the Houston operations. And later on, I got into Director of Operations and did a little bit of everything, ran all the different things like business management, security, engineering, all those things. And my last job was McDonnell Douglas, and then bought out by Boeing, was the building of the neutral buoyancy facility at the Johnson Space Center. We built the largest water tank around that was heated, had a real good gas system and all, and that's where all astronauts train now. They put the space station in it and put the shuttle cockpits and stuff like that in it, and do integrated training. It was 100 feet by 200 feet by 40 feet deep and 6 million gallons of water. A real challenging design in Houston where the water table is about 20 feet. And so we had to build half of it in the ground and half of it out of the ground, and just all kind of fun engineering things. And after that, I decided to call it a day. I'd done about everything I wanted to do in the space program, and the Mars program was too far off, and still is today. So I retired and got involved full-time in UFOs.
It seems like there were a lot of projects you worked on where they actually saw something. What would you say was the percentage? Was there a large percentage of these missions where they saw something that you were involved with?
No, I wouldn't say it was a large percentage. It was probably a fairly small percentage. And the problem is that many of them never talked about it. You know, if you saw the recent documentary on the first landing on the moon, one of the astronauts there said something was out there, but when we were going between Earth and the moon, We verified it wasn't our booster. And he said, what was it? He said, it was a UFO. And he said that NASA told us not to talk about it. And they just talked about it in that recent documentary on, I think it was on the Science Channel.
I haven't seen that one. I'll have to check that out. Were there other early UFO organizations that you worked with?
Well, like I said, I worked with the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization and got to know a lot of their consultants and their people, which were really good people. They had some tremendous volunteers in that organization. I really hated to see it go belly up, but it was one of those things that didn't have a strategy for it living after the people that put it together died. They died with them. Essentially, what happened. And you got to have a succession plan in organizations. You always have to have that, or the organization doesn't last. I mean, look at AT&T. If they'd only had the first president, where would they be today? They would have been out of business, or United Airlines, or any of the rest of them. So it's not the people that run it forever. It's the people that run it for the day. And if there's always a good group of people backed by a lot of other people. And, that's kind of the important thing. APRO didn't have that, unfortunately. They wouldn't let their people take the reins and do something. I never joined NICAP because I was in APRO in those days. If you were in one, you couldn't be in the other, silly rules like that. I never understood that, but I guess that's an elitist game that some people play. I helped form the UFO Study Group of Greater St. Louis in 1970 or so. It's still active today, which I'm pleased to say. A lot of nice people there that have worked on it and are still there and working on it. It has diminished in size, but other than that, I've not done too much with other organizations other than cooperate and give them information whenever they ask. My whole career, I've tried to pump the information out there and not keep it in my hip pocket, and I've done it at my own expense always. And most people don't even say thank you; they feel like they deserved it, which is why so many people don't do it. If people say thanks once in a while, a lot more things would happen for them. But humans are humans, that's the way it goes. I did get a request to join the Science Advisory Board for the National Institute for Discovery Science in Las Vegas, the organization that was financed and backed by Bob Bigelow. I worked with them for several years on this science board. The board of people that Bob asked to volunteer and do this were just tremendous folks. Guys like Hal Putoff and lunar astronaut Ed Mitchell and several people from Los Alamos Labs and people from various other things like the FAA, and one of the people was an expert in nuclear science. And so it was a diverse group of people that felt it was worth working together on a subject like this. And they say no scientists work on this subject. That's a laugh, These guys were all scientists, and they were working together gratefully and doing a beautiful job. It was run by a scientist, Dr. Colin Kelleher was the head of NIDS. He's a tremendous scientist in himself, mainly a physical science. He's interested in biological things, cancer and things of that nature. So he did a good job when it came to looking into cattle mutilations, for instance. They did some tremendous laboratory analysis that was groundbreaking that other people didn't do. At one time, one of the abductees in California said that when he came back, when he went in his closet, that's where he would meet the aliens. And when he came back one time, he decided he was going to trap them, so he had put a towel on the floor with something under so he'd get an indication they were really there. Pretty smart move, actually. And afterwards, he found this tooth on there. It looked like a fang. And it turned out it wasn't like anything like any animal fang, not an ape, not a boar, not any of these things. And it did have a little hair attached to it, and so NIDS ran a lot of DNA analysis work on it several places. The first place came back and said there are no matches in the DNA database for this, so this could be alien. Well, continued the approach and looking into other scientists say, well, what if this towel was taken to the beach? Or what if there was something picked up on the beach? And they found out that this was sort of like a dried slug, what it turned out to be eventually. And they did find a match when they got off into that realm. But, you know, that's the kind of science work they did. And people say, oh, they work for the government, they cover up stuff. They don't. That's ludicrous. They don't. There was some secrecy involved in that. Bob Bigelow is always a target for lawsuits because he has deep pockets. And so he was very careful about what was released and said. If it was negative, he tried not to release it. You know, simply that, just to avoid lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits. But they put the basis of all of their investigations up on their website for all to see. Again, nobody said thank you. They said, why didn't you do more? You know, that sort of thing. So when people try to do science in this field, sometimes they're attacked by the non-scientists that make a lot of noise and get publicity that way, but don't do any real work. And I don't like that sort of thing. I think it's stupid to be put it bluntly. They could do a lot more with cooperation.
Yeah, that's a difficult part of the field is, you know, there seems to be a lot of fighting and bickering back and forth, but I think what people don't see is just that the people who are bickering are the louder people. They're the people who are making more noise, where the real researchers are quieter. They're just got their nose in their research and they're getting that data out. With NIDS, are they still around today? Are they still doing things?
No, NIDS went dormant. It's not out of business per se, but it's dormant. And Dr. Kelleher left NIDS a year or so ago and went into cancer research in California. His first love, by the way, so it was a natural thing for him to do. But the reason they did that was they were there mainly for physical evidence, not just reports of UFOs, lights in the sky, and that sort of thing. They got to the point they weren't getting any good physical evidence cases. Bob Bigelow said, you know, guys, go out there and cooperate with people and find ways of getting good cases. And they still weren't able to get any that they could take to a laboratory and analyze during that period of time. And he said, well, this is a waste of time. And he got into the aerospace business and organized Bigelow Aerospace and decided he would build hotels for space. And he took up the idea of inflatable vehicles. And he has done some marvelous work. I've gone out and viewed the work he's done. His development, his design, his facilities he's built for it, they're all just A-plus work. He's got good people. He's got a small staff. He's going to launch this probably this year, his first test hotel into space, which I applaud him for. So he said, I'm just going to put my time and my effort and my money into that until something else comes along in the UFO field that's worthwhile. So he didn't throw the files away and he didn't do all that. They just put it in a dormant stage. I'm sure if something really good came up, and once he gets his hotels up and that sort of thing, he'd probably return to it.
Yeah, I think what's neat about that whole field and the commercialization of space and what Burt Rutan is doing is that lots of those space programs, they've seen things flying around up there. So if we have people, civilians up there permanently, I think the odds are then increase that they're going to be seeing things up there. But with physical cases, since I've been involved with MUFON and in the research I've done and what I've read in the past MUFON research, it doesn't seem that physical cases come along very often. I can only think of one. Are there many physical cases that you guys have run across?
Well, over the years, there have been hundreds of them. Just look at the work that Ted Phillips did on landing trace cases. I mean, he had some 5,000 landing trace cases, and he has some new ones today. In fact, Ted will be speaking at the MUFON Symposium in July of this year in Denver. He's going to bring some of that new physical trace evidence to us, and I think that people are going to be fascinated by what they got, because Ted's an old-timer in the field. He started the research into physical traces. He helped develop the techniques for laboratory analysis of them. He developed the documentation techniques for physical trace cases, and now he's still doing it, and I applaud him for that. There are not as many as there were, and I'm not sure why that is, but I have a theory. My theory is that the UFO field evolves with time. And I look clear back to 1897 when the airships were flying. Those essentially were a UFO. People say, well, it was a liar society that made those stories up and things like that. If you do personal research into it, you'll find that's not true. That's nice. It's a nice way to answer it if you want to debunk it. But if you really look and see what happened in March, April, May of 1897, there were literally hundreds of these sightings. They were not connected by television or radio or things like that at the time. They did get into the newspapers, but always several days to weeks afterwards. So while they were happening, there's no way people could communicate together across the country and across the central states in particular to duplicate things. It just couldn't be done. And I did do the research on that because I was fascinated by it. I'm still fascinated by it, by the way, and I think there was a treasure trove of information there that a lot of people ignore just simply because it's old. But then you look on through the different eras. We had the eras of physical medical injuries in people. We had several years where that was prevalent. We had several years where car stoppings were prevalent, like a decade or so. They started slow, they built up fast, there were lots of them. There was data taken, the cars were actually analyzed, that sort of thing. Then they dropped off. The same with the medical evidence. There were hundreds and hundreds of cases where people had physiological responses to UFOs. They still do on occasion, but not like that era, which ended in the 80s. There was the era of the abductions, and I say the era of it, we're still having them, but there was a large surge at one point in time where there's a tremendous amount of that was done and an awful lot of good evidence taken by the real researchers in the field. It's sort of like there are waves of Bigfoot and there are waves of other things, There's an evolution in this, and I keep saying if we could kind of be futurist and say, well, if it evolved this way in these steps, what's the next step? What should we be looking for? When the big triangle started being seen in 1974, nobody was ready for that. We weren't flying triangular aircraft then. Even after we started flying the stealth in the late 80s, and the people were seeing that on occasion, that didn't explain the large triangles. The B-2 bomber doesn't explain the large triangles. Some people have tried to say, well, the B-2 bomber has anti-gravity systems on it. Well, if you want to be highly technical, every airplane that flies is an anti-gravity system because it overcomes gravity to get off the ground. But if you're talking about having a system that nullifies gravity to get off the ground, you're kidding yourself. I've been hearing this for 50 years. It's always a black program. It's always just a big black program out there, and that's why you don't know what it is. But never do you ever see anything come out after the black program that supposedly ends that can explain it. Not one situation. At one time, the CIA said, well, the UFOs really were the U-2 aircraft flying at 60,000 feet. Well, none of the reports we got, zero, were from 60,000 feet. Most of them were from 500 feet or on the ground or near the ground, that sort of thing. Even though the CIA said that explained UFOs, it didn't. Nobody reported that because you couldn't see it. You had radar, you could track it, but, And the jet intercepts that were made by our Air Force and Navy and Marine pilots over the years, none of those were U-2s. None of those were black program things. These were things that the experts of the day could not explain and still can't today. And I still say that's a treasure trove of information. You have one general that says, well, I was flying this aircraft along with these people, and we picked up on radar something. We had checked with the ground, and ground also tracked it and told us what they were painting. We dove at it. We couldn't catch it. It took off and left us in our tracks and flew out of sight. That still happens today. You just don't hear much about it today because of the Patriot Act. They can't talk about it now. So it's a good way of covering up UFO cases as well, unfortunately. So, it's a wild world of UFOs out there. The stuff is real, and I'd like to say one thing. UFOs are not everything that's seen in the sky. A UFO to me is something that's still unidentified after it's properly investigated. So that eliminates the lights in the sky and the hoaxes and anything else of that nature. And it's that residual that is unexplainable totally that becomes an unconventional flying object. And it's not something we're building. And it hasn't been something we've been building for the last 50 years. I wish we were. That's why I got involved, by the way. I wanted to build this sort of thing. I wanted to get rid of fire-breathing rockets and go to technology that's environmentally friendly. And, by the way, will help us survive on this earth because oil is going to run out. The technology is there. If we just get people to have a Manhattan Project for it, we could develop it probably in less than 5 years.
One of the talks that I heard you do before was on implants, and that was one of the best talks I've heard on implants, and you had the same theme, how implants have also been evolving and changing over time. Can you talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, implants are an interesting facet. That's one piece of information in an abduction case that is physically real that you can take to the bank, or take to the laboratory, I should say. When somebody says, there's something under my skin and it bothers me, some people even say, well, I can feel this intensely just before an abduction. There was all kind of things, claims made by people. Or they say, I had this abduction experience and I had nosebleed for 4 or 5 days, like the Linda Cortiel case in New York, when they had the abduction out of their apartment, way up high in the air, out the window and up to the craft. Their son and a son's friend that was there that night, and I believe the husband also, all had nosebleeds afterwards. Not a normal nosebleed, but because something was done. Well, that begs the question, well, if there's physical evidence from that abduction case, let's get it into the laboratory. So various people have taken pieces of material out of abductees. And you can call them experiencers if you want. To me, they're still an abductee. They're somebody that was taken against their will. They were abducted. No matter how you want to put it, that's not right. And if you look at the implants that have been removed, they seem to have evolved over time. And when we were starting to get these first implant reports, that wasn't the technology that was used by humans. Today you say implant. There are implants to avoid pregnancy. There are implants for hearing. There are implants for keeping your heart going. There are implants for everything. There are implants they put in the ears of animals, farm animals, to identify them, or in the pets so you can find them if they get lost. These are all different than what was originally seen. None of these existed back in the early days when abductees were reporting implants and various medical people were removing them. Sometimes they just came out on their own. And then, if you look at what came out, it didn't seem to make any sense. And a few of them had little microscopic level things that looked like little wires attached to them and things like that. But most of them were pretty blasé. You say, well, how could that do anything? Well, how do we know? If you're looking at a technology that's 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years ahead of us, maybe it doesn't have to look like something we want it to look like to be useful. And so I say, don't throw it away just because you don't understand it. Wait for the technology to catch up. Well, the technology of implants has caught up. And, in fact, humans are making them for everything. They put them in your garments. They put them in your books. They're in everything today. But they're a lot more sophisticated. They are little printed circuits, essentially, in each case. And some are this passive and sitting there. Others are active with an antenna. There's all kinds of them today, but they have definitely evolved, and very rapidly once humans started using this technology. And you say, well, was that stimulated by the implants and abductees? Somewhere along the line it had to be somewhat stimulated by that. Somebody got to say, well, these people are saying this, why don't we do this? Frankly, I wouldn't particularly want to be implanted myself by humans or anybody else, but there are lots of people who will go get that done. And I think in another 10 to 15 years, you'll see all humans implanted with an ID, national ID implant, regardless of what country they're in. It's coming. It's going to shake people up, but it's one of those evolutions that we're going to see.
Yeah, which is unfortunate because lots of times we implement sciences before we even understand them. But I also, this talk reminds me of a document that I read of yours that you wrote in the 70s about the science regarding the objects we're seeing, that they're displaying these technologies that are beyond us, but because they exist, they're exhibiting that science exists and that we should move in that direction. It seems there were a lot of people in that time period in the early days of the UFO that were thinking that way. Scientists, when they were thinking more scientifically about the subject. Do you think that worked? Do you think people started moving in those directions because of the sightings?
Well, I'm sure the people that did the actual work would say, no, that's ridiculous. I thought of it. It was my brainstorm, That's always the case. But then when you look at any major breakthrough in science, it usually doesn't happen in one laboratory. Suddenly it pops out in a half a dozen in different parts of the world. We've seen that over and over and over. And you got to say a little bit, well, why is that? Did something else stimulate it? And I think there is a stimulus. It was a stimulus for me to get involved in UFO research, simply because I wanted to see propulsion technology modified. I still want to see that. I'm hoping it happens while I'm still around this Earth. If it doesn't, we humans are going to be the losers, because the Earth can't sustain us at the rate we're going.
I guess along those lines, then, there's lots of talk. The scientist's name who's really big on this eludes me, but there's, of course, Bob Lazar and lots of what Stephen Greer talks about with the zero-point energy and the zero-point technologies. Do you believe that exists? Do you believe we're getting close to that, or is there any, big money being thrown at that right now?
Well, it's hard to say what kind of money is being thrown at it in military laboratories and the like. But I can tell you one of the leading proponents of zero-point energy is Dr. Hal Puthoff. I think Puthoff is probably one of the best scientists that this Earth has ever seen. He is a good guy. He works hard. He is a brilliant man. He has the scientific and mathematical capability to do things like this, and so he does them. He doesn't just rest on his laurel and throw out some books to make some money. He really gets into research on a constant basis. And so a lot of other people have picked up on zero-point energy. Yeah, sure, I think it exists. There's pretty darn good evidence if you look at the scientific evidence of it. Harnessing it, though, is another whole thing. How we harness that with today's technology is a real big question. And I don't think we're anywhere near having that harnessed yet. I think we know a lot about it. The papers I've read, I'm really fascinated by how much we do know. But putting it in the back of your Ford and going into space, no, it's not anywhere near that point yet.
With Hal Puthoff and the scientists, you made a statement earlier that, which is true, the media and all of these documentaries, they talk about there's no scientists working in these fields. There's no scientists paying attention to UFOs. But as you've experienced throughout your life, and there are lots of scientists working on this, why do you think they say that? Is it because they're not in academic, universities working on it, or why would they say that, and why doesn't that information get out?
Well, you always hear that from people that want to debunk the UFO mystery. They say there are no scientists involved in it. That's not scientific. Well, what's not scientific is debunking. If you're willing to take a set of evidence and ignore all the points that don't fit what you think the answer should be, then you can debunk it, and that's what the debunkers do. They very seldom work with facts. They work with innuendos. They make statements like no scientists get involved. So a lot of scientists say, well, I don't want to get involved. No scientists get involved. So it's really a way of laying the hammer down on people. But it's not true. MUFON has 300 scientists that volunteer with MUFON that are involved in this and are interested in this. NIDS had the Science Advisory Board, which was a dozen people or so. But, APRO, way back when APRO was in existence, they had dozens and dozens of scientists that were doing work. And back in those days, NICAP had scientists. And each of the small groups around today has some scientific expertise involved. So there are a lot of scientists. What the real truth is, however, is that scientists generally don't get paid to work in this field. If you would show me, say, $1 billion of research money that could be doled out by any agency for UFO research, those same debunkers would be the first people in line to get that money, because that's what they like, is money. It's not science for the sake of science, and I think it's really sad. But on the other hand, if there was that kind of money, who would be the person that aimed it and guided it for what? Would it be still people that have a religious bent that want to prove UFOs are anti-religious, therefore they would bend the science that direction? Are they people that are politically bent that say, well, that would undermine all of the people that have covered that up in our government, and that would bring the government down? You just kind of start hypothesizing all these situations, and you'll find there is no simple answer. There's no simple answer anywhere in this field. And it has become so muddied because of these negative things that have been done over the years, which really are akin to dirty tricks. Richard Nixon would have worked well in this field. I mean, dirty tricks fits fine. And that's the sort of people that are doing these things today. I have very little respect for those people, so I just avoid them.
That reminds me of the Kehoe book. I just got done reading one of them. I think it's Aliens Are Real. And in his book, he goes over the history of the military involvement and some scientific involvement, some real high-level people that were involved in trying to get the information out. And he talks about organizations like the CIA, which shut up the different services, and that the CIA had some sort of involvement. Do you believe, like in the Majestic 12, like there is some sort of control group spending money on this, they're just not giving the information to the public?
Well, if you send a request into some agency of the federal government, you will get a form letter back that says that the federal government hasn't been involved in UFOs since Project Blue Book closed. And that was after the end of the Condon Report in 1968. That, by the way, is when MUFON came into existence in 1969, because these people said there's no place to report. Civilians couldn't report anymore. Literally, there was no place to go. They were just given idiot treatment. That didn't mean UFO sightings stopped. It just meant they didn't have any place to go, and so MUFON came into being. However, that doesn't really mean that much otherwise. What is the baseline of this whole thing is that the government is still taking data. If you look at documents that we have legally received through the Freedom of Information Act off of government websites, mainly before 9/11, unfortunately, in 2001, it showed tons and tons of documents that were distributed to most government agencies on UFOs right up to when they closed those access to those files after 9/11. That was a long ways to 1968. And some of the agencies listed, for instance, were the CIA, the NSA, the Secretary of State, the rooms in the White House, they call it the operation centers. Each of the major military branch heads, chiefs of staff. If there's nothing to this, why are those reports distributed to those people? Even though they're telling you they're not and they're not getting them, they are. So this is still very real today. It's just that you as a civilian aren't entitled to know it.
With some of the rumors that go around about what's going on, because, of course, like you said, they're gathering information, but why, who, what, unfortunately is not available to us. Some of the rumors out there, I just wanted to talk about. One of the rumors is around a group called the Aviary, and lots of MUFON heads are said to be part of this group, and people don't understand what this is, and they make these sometimes claims that they're involved with these control groups, the CIA and MJ-12. Can you shed any light on that group?
Well, silly as it sounds, I was never able to get into the Aviary. I asked people, how do you do this? I want to rub elbows with these guys, because they're interesting people. It really started with Bill Moore. Bill Moore had this, invisible college of people from various organizations that were well-named people that were interested in UFOs, that worked together, and they gave each of them a bird name, so they didn't use their real names when they communicated, because as soon as you give a real name, somebody's going to dump on you. That's the bottom line. And people involved in that were neat people. Hal Penoff was one of the Aviary. Kit Green, CIA, was one of the Aviary. There were people like that they were nice people. They did the hard work. Just because they worked for an organization didn't make them bad. Quite often somebody says, well, in MUFON, we know that you got this guy that was an Air Force person. Well, sure, we got people from every walk of life, and we welcome it. Just because they were in the Air Force or in the Army or in the Navy or work for an agency of some kind doesn't mean they're bad people. And it probably means that they're smart enough to know this is worth working on after they leave those jobs. So I'm very open to anybody from any organization that wants to join. I'm all for it. If they got guts enough to step out and do it, I've got guts enough to accept them. That's what it comes down to. I've never been burned by it. I think it's a good thing. If you were going in for a brain operation, would you want to go to get you a couple of local doctors out of Podunk Junction and have them operate on your brain, or would you want to go to the people that have really been working in brains? That's what like to, the analogy I'd like you to look at here. You got people that have been in agencies that have taken the data, Air Force general or Air Force colonel or something that recorded, watched the radar scopes and made the reports on the radar cases. I really welcome them to say something and step out. And I find it ludicrous that people say, well, you can't trust them because they used to be in the Air Force. God, those people keep us alive and keep our enemies off our back. So, yeah, they're trustworthy people. If there's one or two that has an untoward goal, so be it. And I think we've had some of those that have joined our organization from time to time, but they eventually drop out because it isn't worth their time to pester us. There's another aspect of this, too. When they closed Project Blue Book and Condon's, Edward Condon of the Condon Report said there's nothing of science value to be gained from the further study of UFOs. Well, that was a lie, first off. He did not read the report. He just made his answer up the way he was supposed to. There is something to be gained from it, and it will continue to be something to be gained from it. That's a political answer. Political answers I have no use for, by the way. I've dealt with a lot of politicians in my life through the space program and through other things. Lots of them are really good people, but a lot of them have to toe a party line that, just like with UFOs, there's nothing there, therefore we can't talk about it. Well, sometimes some congressmen don't agree with that. I had a meeting with Congressman Tom Tancredo here in Colorado, and the reason we had it was that was when Stan Romanek's case came up, and Stan had come to our office and said, you know, I had this sighting, I made videotape, and I've been abducted. And this was a time when we were going to release that information, and Tancredo was in our district here where our headquarters was. So I said, you want to be briefed on what we're doing? And he said, sure. And so I went over there and sat with him for about an hour and his chief scientific aide. And I said, you know, if this is happening in your district, you should be aware of it. You should be interested in it. And he said, I am. And it turned out that his aide had researched all of the Greer documents and knew implicitly who these people were that were in the government that said that they had been involved in UFOs, and Tancredo had been briefed. And then he asked questions showing that he understood this mystery. He understood it was a problem. And then at the end, he asked me one question that I wasn't prepared for. He said, what can I do for you? And I was flabbergasted because I didn't expect him to even listen to me. And it didn't give him a good answer, quite honestly. But the man was interested. He did know about it, and it was obvious that he knew that other congressmen knew. You know, he's enough of a rebel that he was willing to tackle it. And I never heard anything more. And then this last year, I went up and Clifford Cliff, one of our board members, arranged a meeting with Senator Allard. And again, Allard was aware. He's on the Space Committee, so he's aware of space and space activities and that sort of thing. And he offered to help. But since then, I think he's found out he couldn't because we haven't been able to get any help. But during the meeting, he was aware of the situation, and he said he was willing to help us. I told him, I said, you know, we are a database that is par excellence. We have investigators in the field. We have people that see things, that know things. You have what you call a new intelligence organization, which is based on the Patriot Act. I said, but there are things that you're missing. I said, in fact, the week before, just the week before I met with him, I said, did you know right here in your district, in your hometown, there was a UFO sighting of a large triangular object flying at less than 500 feet over people's heads that were witnessed. And I said, it's right down the street from where we're meeting here in northern Colorado. He didn't know about that. I said, that's an example. I said, your Patriot people should have known that was there. We knew it was there. And we're willing to share that information. We make everything we get public. So he was I think he was kind of impressed with that. He spent quite a bit of time with us, which is a lot for a senator to do. So there are people in the government that are good people that would do something if the politics were right for them to do it. And I don't know how we get it into that position. We're living in a very hostile world with a lot of dirty deeds going on. and the protection from that kind of overrides science and freedoms. And there's got to be a balance struck somewhere one of these days. And we at MUFON are standing by to jump in when that balance is struck.
Actually, you know, when I joined, that's one of the things that lent credibility to this whole thing, and including MUFON, is that there are a lot of ex-government people involved with MUFON, or current. They're still working in government projects, or they're still a policeman, or they're still in the reserves. We have a lot of Air Force. We have ex-CIA. You know, we had Daryl Sims was the first interview I've posted so far. He worked for the CIA. There's a local, you're going to speak at a group next week, and the gentleman heading up that group is a great guy. Rick Nelson used to work for intelligence. A lot of people, and I think it's great because they have skills that I can learn from, because I don't come from these backgrounds, and I'm learning a lot from these people. But the factor, just like you brought up at the end, is the fear. I found there's so much fear in this field. With people getting involved, everybody's fearful of everyone and everyone's background, whether they're military or where they come from. But also I find a lot of deep-seated fear in these investigations I've done. Now that I've been able to get a few done, a lot of these people, including friends of mine or people I know who see something, they may want to let me know that they saw something. Holy cow, what is this? I didn't even believe you that these things existed. But they're too afraid even to report to us. Just a lot of fear.
Well, it's hard to come up with an answer for that, but I have a feeling about it. I think the fear is based on years of cover-up, where people were made fun of along the way. They were ridiculed. They give an honest report and an honest answer, and then some dishonest debunker or official comes out with an answer that's just ludicrous and makes them look stupid. People don't like to look stupid. You know, I don't care where you work, who you are, whether you're male, female, child, adult, old or young. You don't like to look stupid. And so you think somebody's going to make you look that way, you're going to hedge your bet. And that's the way it works every time. And so that's a real good weapon that's used against us doing good work, is they lever that on people, and people say, oh, it's going to happen. Well, I can tell you now that I have never been threatened by anybody. I did have one run-in once, but never as a result of working this. And working in the space business, you'd think I would have gotten run over with a steamroller. I didn't. In fact, when I worked at the Johnson Space Center, I spoke to every major technical society at the center, and I spoke to lots of brown bag lunches of workers from the center. I never once spoke to the high-level management office people. They avoided it like the plague. But everybody on the lower level had a high interest. They were good people. They believed it's real. A lot of them had heard things, had seen things. They knew of cases that were wild and that sort of thing. But again, they didn't want it told outside of there for fear those higher level people that didn't want to talk about it would do something to them in their jobs. I don't know of many cases where that happened. But the fear is there, and if you have a fear, whether it's rational or not, it doesn't matter. And I always dealt with it this way. I dealt with it openly. I dealt with it honestly. I said what I was going to do. I did what I said I was going to do. I didn't try to make trouble for other people. That wasn't my purpose. My purpose was gaining technological information, and I still have that purpose today. And that's one reason I treat people the way I do. I try to treat them nicely in MUFON, because these are people that merit one extra step of being treated nicely, because they overcame that fear, and they joined, and they decided to do something. So to me, those are the heroes in this field, people that really decide to step out and work. And I applaud them for it. The people that sit back and say, well, I heard the government's going to get me if I talk about this. You know, when I mentioned earlier when I first started, I was working on the Gemini program at McDonnell Douglas in the 1960s, and my wife called me one day, and she said, I had been on one of the local radio stations, and my wife called me and she said, there's a woman that called here today that's absolutely scared to death, but she had an incident happen just west of St. Louis out on a farm. And in a nutshell, what happened, her and her son were coming home down the road in the daylight, and they saw this object that was hovering over a farm next to them. Her husband had cancer and was dying at home, so they'd been off to get his medicine. They watched this thing, and while they were watching it over this barn, the barn caught fire. And so they ran into the house and got out of the car, ran in the house, closed the shades, and peeked out and watched, and the thing went away. But she was scared to death it was going to come back and set their house on fire. And my wife said, well, did you report it to the police or anybody? She said, no, I don't want the government coming out here and hauling me off, putting me in an institution or something. And that struck me so hard, that here was this poor woman suffering anyhow from all these other things, and she had this non-rational fear the government was going to get her. She talked about that thing being over somebody's barn. And that's another thing that stimulated me to speak out and to openly give the information out and try to quell those unnatural fears. I think we all have a responsibility of doing that. Sure, UFO reports are bizarre. In some cases, people have been harmed, but that is a very small number. And as far as the government coming and get you and hauling you away, that doesn't happen either, and at least not very often. And in these days, probably not at all. I think after the Blue Book closed in the 60s, that the government had sufficient instrumentation themselves to collect information on UFO sightings. They didn't need public reports anymore. And I think that's the way it is today. If you look at this country today, the United States, you will find it is interlaced with radar systems from ground to orbit that can track anything that goes over the country. And when we have a large triangle sighting at almost any altitude, I am sure somebody is tracking it. We're not getting that data in the UFO groups, and maybe we don't deserve to. I don't know. It'd be nice if we did. But it's there. Somebody's doing it. So they don't need eyewitness reports anymore.
That reminds me of Scott Ramsey. He was one of the speakers at the last MUFON symposium and doing research in the Aztec supposed UFO crash. And in his investigation, he had found a wide radar network throughout the country in the late 40s. And even in the 40s, when these things got instituted, and they were technologies which I still don't know if they've been disclosed. He said in one case, they said these radar were able to help kill 17 Japanese U-boats in one day. So, but this technology he was able to demonstrate and find through classified documents was throughout the country. He also found that private organizations, Texas Instruments and other companies had a large stake in these. Do you think that these private organizations are very involved and have a lot, I guess, working in this field largely as well?
Well, every organization of the government has a limited staff. I mean, if you are NASA, at any given center, you have a limited staff. And the way you get the work done is that you give contracts to private organizations to do the work. That's how I worked at the Johnson Space Center. I was under contract through McDonnell Douglas at the Johnson Space Center, and we did all the flight control work and that sort of thing that supplemented this small NASA workforce. And that's the case with security organizations as well. I mean, Los Alamos doesn't have their own government police unit. They have a contractor that does it. They have a contractor that runs Los Alamos, for instance, University of California. These are private organizations that are not bound by a lot of the rules that government organizations, the Freedom of Information Act, for instance, doesn't apply to these private organizations. Doesn't apply to anybody anymore, hardly. I mean, that's been kind of negated. But nevertheless, if you want something to be kept really, really secret, you put it in a private organization. And these people are good at that. I worked in some of those kind of programs, and I can tell you, if it's a secret, you don't tell it. And most people don't know it. There are programs that have come and gone, and nobody even knows they existed. And mainly because they were done by private organizations.
To move on, you referred to the trends, how the phenomena seems to be changing over time. Do you recognize a current trend?
Well, the current trend I'm recognizing is the lack of some of the mundane type things that were taking place before. It's like it's not necessary anymore. But the biggest trend is to the addition of the big triangles to the mix of types of UFOs seen. It doesn't mean we don't have lots of disk sightings and lots of spherical sightings, but we are seeing a real growth in triangular sightings. And I'm doing research on that and intend to put a catalog of that together one of these days. And I've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of triangular sightings, and they do not fit the characteristics of aircraft that we have. Now, some people said, well, the government has Lockheed or somebody building these huge balloons, and that's what they are, huge balloons. That's why they can fly slowly and hover around in the sky. If that were true, how do they take off at light speed? You won't ever see a balloon take off like a rocket. It doesn't answer it. And besides, we actually did the research and found that they didn't build these huge balloons that some of the people are talking about, like the Ariane, for instance. Lockheed is looking at a prototype right now, one that can stay up for days at high altitude. It's really big, but it's not proliferating the area, and it's not flying at 500 feet above the ground around the areas. NIDS did one investigation. They took 3 databases, their own database, the Larry Hatch database, and the MUFON database, and asked us for triangular reports, feedback. And when they did, they were able to plot them within like 50 to 100 miles of some major Air Force bases. And that would lead you to believe they were something flying from the major Air Force bases. However, when you look at the reports, they weren't at the bases. They were at low altitude, miles out from the bases. And if you look at the way aircraft take off, they have a rapid acceleration to get up to a certain altitude, and then they fly higher and higher, depending on what kind of aircraft they are, to conserve fuel and to go long distances and to go fast and all that sort of thing. They don't stay at 500 feet or below across the country, hour after hour, day after day. And so when NIDS put that report out with that hypothesis in it, everybody jumped on and said, there's the answer. It's the Air Force doing it. That wasn't NIDS what they had in mind. They thought somebody would come back and say, that doesn't fit the data. Nobody said that. They just accepted it. The media accepted it. Agencies accepted it. And it became kind of a law. And Dr. Killer said, that wasn't the intent at all. We threw it out there because this is what the data showed, but it didn't give the answer. And so nobody refuted the hypothesis. And to this day, it still stands because nobody refuted it.
All right. That was the interview with John Schuessler. There's a little bit more, but really we got into talking about the symposium from a few years ago. So we left that part out. But if for some reason you want to hear that, you can go to ufothinktank.com. But you can get an idea of what a wealth of knowledge that John Schuessler is. And what's funny is this was before I started doing PR for MUFON. And, when I started, MUFON's into nuts and bolts. They don't believe in abduction and blah, 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 this and that. But you can hear from this interview from a founding member, from someone who was the director for the period of time where people were saying this. He's obviously very, very open-minded. And the board is like that. That's why I like to get on members of the board. I've had several of the members of the MUFON board on so people could get to know these guys and see what they're like, because otherwise it's very mysterious, who are these people? And hopefully one day I could get Bob Bigelow on, because that would be great, so people can realize that these are people who are genuinely interested in finding out information. Of course, everyone has a different way of going about it, and everyone has different opinions on the best way to do the investigation and how to get the information. And sometimes people feel that, people are hoarding information, or they're not being as open as they should, or this or that. But everybody really, their intent is to find the information, and especially with MUFON, as you can hear with this, to share the information. And with MUFON, they're a volunteer organization. So, and what's wonderful is, you don't have to agree with everybody to be a part of MUFON. And most areas, most states have local meetings. So it's a place where you can go meet like-minded people and get information and see some of the great speakers, or talk to some of the people who have done some great research. And you'll be surprised on the varying opinions that people hold. Speaking of someone who has varying opinions, is Dr. John Alexander. He was an Army colonel, and leading advocate for the development of non-lethal weapons. He also investigated UFOs and paranormal phenomena, and he's going to be on the show next week to talk about how disclosures happen and the government doesn't know as much about UFOs as we think, according to Mr. Alexander. Let's hear what he has to say. So thanks for listening to Open Minds Radio. Don't forget to visit openminds.tv for more UFO news. Talk to you next week, people.